Welcome everyone to Gamer Melt. Today, Intel finally announced their ARC series lineup. We're talking we have specs, performance, a ton of stuff. Now, I will go ahead and say right off the bat that this is their mobile GPUs, but we have a really interesting thing at the end that is about their desktop GPUs. But first, I've got a huge announcement to make. If you've been following the PC hardware industry for any amount of time, you know how hard it can be to keep up with all the announcements and release dates. There's always something right around the corner to where even the big releases can get confusing. Well, today I'm announcing the GamerMeld Notification Squad, and it's basically a way to remove all the clutter. Once you sign up, I'll send you notifications when new CPUs, GPUs, and other big hardware get announced with the release dates, as well as a notification when they actually release. I hope to let you know right when it happens so you can be one of the first to buy. And while it is via email, don't worry, I'm only going to send you important stuff. I'm not going to be spamming you with useless emails. So don't wait and be the first in line for new releases by visiting the link in the description below. Okay, it's news time, and as you can see, as the leak suggested, this is their A-series mobile graphics. In fact, the leaks pretty much told us everything, at least as far as the naming scheme and quite a bit of the specs, but let's go right to those specs. Well, really quickly, go ahead and say that we have ARC 3, ARC 5, and ARC 7. Obviously, ARC 7 being the high performance, ARC 5 they're calling advanced, and ARC 3 is enhanced, which is essentially their lower end cards. Now, moving on, we have the actual specs. First up, we have the ARC A350M and A370M, which I will go ahead and say are the ones that they're launching now. The remainder of the GPUs, or the higher end and therefore most interesting parts, aren't available until early summer. And really with that, I guess I'll go ahead and say that it is at least a little bit concerning just because they've already pushed back their desktop cards to later in the year than they originally announced, because it was first going to be Q1, now it's Q2. And now it looks like their higher end SKUs are being pushed back to later as well, almost like they're not ready. But I will go ahead and say that as hard as they are pushing this, some of the stuff that they showed us and things like that, especially the news at the end, definitely shows that they're not going to be doing something like they did with 10 nanometers, where they promise it, and it keeps getting pushed further and further to the point where it's coming out 2 years from now. I highly doubt anything like that's going to happen. But anyway, like I said, let's get right to the specs. First up, we have the A350M, which comes with 6 XE cores. Now, I want to go ahead and say, for those who aren't familiar with the architecture of the XE architecture, specifically XE HPG, which is going to be their high performance gaming based GPUs, which are their ARC GPUs. So this is essentially the architecture of these GPUs. And as you can see, one XE core is 16 vector engines and 16 matrix engines. Basically, when you're looking and trying to kind of compare and figure out how many cores it has, like regular cores, you're going to take the number and multiply it by 16. For example, when we move back, we can see that the highest end card, the A770M, has 32 XE cores, which means 512 execution units. So their execution units are kind of their older way of doing it, sort of, but it's basically a way of looking at it if you are knowledgeable with Intel's regular iGPUs. So this will have 512, which is absolutely what was leaked. So once again, we're seeing many of the leaks come to fruition. Anyway, with the earlier one, you can see 6 XE cores, 6 ray tracing units. So once again, it does have cores specific for ray tracing. Then we move over here. We have the clocks. It has 1150 megahertz. Then memory, which is GDDR6, it comes with 4 gigabytes, 64-bit bus, 25 to 35 watt power. The A370M bumps it up a little bit to 8 XE cores and 8 ray tracing units, 1550 megahertz, 4 gigabytes of memory still, 64-bit, 35 to 50 watts. Then we move up to the A550M, which is their ARC 5 GPUs. This one doubles that to 16 cores, 16 ray tracing units, 900 megahertz, so it does lower the clocks quite a bit, but we're literally talking double the cores. Then it has 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 across a 128-bit bus, 60 to 80 watt TGP. Moving on, we have the A730M, 24 cores, so we're getting quite a bit more now. 1100 megahertz clock, so this is back up quite a bit. 12 gigabytes of GDDR6, 192-bit bus, 80 to 120 watts. Finally is the A770M with the full 512 EU GPU, 32 Xe cores, 32 ray tracing cores, 1650 megahertz. So this is getting much higher. And remember that these are still mobile GPUs. So they will likely be able to push it significantly higher than that when it comes to desktop cards. So these GPUs are actually looking pretty impressive, especially since even with this, really quickly, 16 gigabytes of GDDR6, very nice, across 256-bit bus, 120 to 150 watts. So we're only at 120 to 150 at 1650 megahertz. So when we move on to desktop, there's a very decent chance that it could get even higher than that. Really, there's a decent chance that some of the rumors we've seen with it crossing 2 gigahertz could in fact be possible. Moving on from here, we can go ahead and get to performance. Now, unfortunately, they only give us performance for the A370M just because this is going to be one of the cards that they launch. But anyway, when we look, we can see, unfortunately, they're only comparing it to the Iris Xe, so an integrated GPU, and I will say that it does do significantly better. We're talking upwards of 100% or more higher performance, though it looks like it's more like 50% or so across the board. Either way, a big performance jump over the Iris Xe, but when we compare it to modern cards, I was looking, I think it's like it gets something like half the performance or less of the 2060. Though, of course, remember that this is a mobile GPU and it is their absolute lowest end card. Remember, well, not the lowest in series, but the higher end card, but we're still only talking about 8 Xe cores. So a big difference between this and this. So I will definitely say that it isn't really that bad. When we move over here, we can see that they also compared it in more professional workloads, but of course the gaming is the more interesting part. Then we move here. In more competitive games, they have GTA 5, Fortnite, Rocket League, Valorant. It's getting over 90 FPS at 1080p. Definitely not bad. Moving on, Intel actually showed off what they're calling ARC Control, which is basically where you can go in and overclock, where you can, look at, it's basically like your driver screen from what I can see. They very much hyped on no login required, which I very much like. It does seem like pretty much everything today requires a username and password. It's gotten absolutely ridiculous, at least if you ask me. I mean, I don't think a driver needs my username and password, though, of course, if you like to save those settings, things like that, that could be one benefit of it if it offers that. But of course, if you don't want to, at least with this, it isn't required. And next up, they did announce the first laptop that's going to be equipped with their ARC 3 graphics, and that is the Samsung Galaxy Book 2 Pro. Ultra thin and light laptop, of course, and it is apparently available now. Next up, I have a couple things, just like some screenshots to show you of Intel's XeSS, their super sampling, which is what the SS stands for, and Xe, of course. You can kind of see here, this is the 1080p native. This is the 4K upscaled. It really doesn't take much to see that the XeSS version is significantly better, but this one isn't really the best example. I think one of the best examples is this right here. We can see if you look around the edges. Now, this is 250% magnification already, but when you look around the edges, you can see not very well defined, while right here it looks significantly better. We have another example right here, which clearly you can see the blocks look significantly sharper over on the XeSS side than the 1080p native. Definitely looks better when we look at the character. Significant difference there as well. And moving on, we can see in the presentation that they showed, they do sort of like a turnaround where you can see 1080p and XeSS. It is a significant difference. So This certainly is looking good, though of course we'll need it in our hands to test it, to actually run it through its paces, third-party tests versus coming directly best case scenario from Intel. And all of this leads me to the creme de la creme of what was announced today. They held it for last for very good reason, because it was absolutely the most interesting part of the announcement. Sort of. I really am excited to see the specs, even of the mobile GPUs, but as you can see right here, we have the look of, at the very least, a limited edition ARC GPU. So this clearly is a desktop GPU, as it says, coming summer 2022. Limited edition graphics. So this is probably going to be something like Intel's Founders Edition cards. This is basically the ones made by them. I'm assuming that's why they're limited edition. They'll probably sell it right when they're first released and then kind of stop a month or so after and move on to purely third-party cards. At least that is my guess. But either way, this is definitely an interesting one. I do like the all black aesthetic here with the chrome kind of bar going around it. You can also see over here, don't worry, there are fans. So this is a dual fan GPU. I definitely think it looks pretty awesome. It's going to work really well in a lot of builds. And you can see right here that it has Intel Arc lit up white, though who knows, maybe it's RGB. I definitely hope so. Though of course, still this would work really well in quite a bit of builds, just because they didn't put anything blue. They didn't put anything making it a specific color requirement. And yeah, that basically does it. So I hope you liked the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and let me know what you think about Intel's ARC GPUs down in the comments below. And if you did like the video, please make sure to subscribe. And as always, have a great day.